All right, so welcome to Lansing McLoskey, all the way from California, but also Miami, where he's the professor of composition at University of Miami Frost. So, thank thank you for joining. Thank you for joining us today. Um, I'll hand it over.
All right. Nice to be here. Thank you, Elizabeth. And as we start to, I don't know, head towards the final cadence of this festival, I just want to thank Elizabeth and the whole team who've been running all the, different sessions and events and the wonderful guest composers. And so thank you. Everyone should give let's see how we do this. There we go. So it's been a pleasure. I've had a chance to meet basically everyone, I think, in some capacity, either individual Zooms or in your presentations. It's just been great. So today, Elizabeth just asked me, what's the title of your talk, or what are you going to talk about? And so I guess I'm just going to talk about stuff. Let me see if I can share this. Compositional concepts and techniques I'm interested in. Can you see this? I need to minimize this. Or, things I care about. So, here's just a bullet point list. Okay. Consonance and dissonance. I mean, I could just stop right here. Because if there's one thing that I think about more, that permeates every piece of music that I write, regardless of genre, aesthetic, intent, whatever, instrumentation, it's thinking about consonance and dissonance. Kira will recognize a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about, actually, but this is something that I introduced to my comp students, like freshmen, on, I don't know, day 2, because I think that we as composers actually don't think about consonance and dissonance enough. Or we think about it in a very traditional black and white way, in terms of, historical definitions of what is consonant, what is dissonance. And a few years ago, I taught an entire semester-long course just on consonance and dissonance, and it was just fantastic. With, I think it was fantastic. With tons of reading and musical examples, and how to end up turning your expectations and your ears inside out. Much too deep of a topic to just go into too much today, but it does just top my list of things that I think about. And one of the many elements of consonance and dissonance that interests me, and has for 3 decades, is the consonant use of dissonance and the dissonant use of consonance. Okay, somebody else will deal with the waiting room issue. Time and temporality. I was just so thrilled to hear Roberto Andreoni's wonderful presentation about time, because it touches upon so many of the issues that I care about, and in my own music, and teach in my courses all the time, in individual lessons, from freshmen to doctoral students, and in courses. So it's, again, I taught a whole course called Time and Temporality. And even with a whole semester, we only, I feel like, scratched the surface. But one element of time and temporality that I'm particularly interested in, and you heard me mention this during Roberto's wonderful presentation, is the poly. In other words, poly can mean many different things. of course, many voices, polyphony. And of course, we're all used to thinking in terms of time and rhythm. We think of polymeters. But I'm interested in time and rhythm that goes beyond just polymeter. So music where the listener perhaps senses the music unfolding at different rates of time at the simultaneously. This is something that we actually can experience in real life, and it's something that other artists in different fields, in film and in novels, have explored for the greater part of a century. I hope that you're all familiar with the work of Jonathan Kramer. He was a composer, but primarily a theorist. And he wrote a great deal about time and temporality, and how discussing, again, it's difficult to summarize in the next 60 seconds, but how we experience time in different ways all the time. That I didn't intend that pun. So that we're thinking about the past and the present and the future all the time. You've all sat in some situation where 10 minutes passes and it feels like an hour. You're just like, oh my gosh. And then another situation, 10 minutes passes and literally you feel mentally, emotionally, and physically like it was 5 minutes. Well, how does that translate in music? How does that happen? Is that something that composers can do intentionally? Of course. In a state of near sleep, when you're not quite in REM sleep, this is something it's been studied. There is articles written about this where our sense of time gets particularly skewed, and we can start thinking about events of the day, or something that we're going to do, or something from 20 years ago, or a piece of music, and they're unfolding in your mind simultaneously at different rates of time, which is impossible to do on a concert stage, right? But, okay, neo-heterophony. It's another element that I think about, and it's a compositional technique that I use a lot in my music. And again, I was so happy to see this pop up, not the neo, but the heterophony on Roberto's presentation. I think too often composers, particularly in the Western tradition, we think of monophony, polyphony, monody, homophony, and then occasionally heterophony, which isn't very common in Western music, but he played a wonderful example. And I've explored for the past 25 years something that I term neo-heterophony. So it's a monophonically derived polyphony. Cross-fertilization, but not hybrid or crossover, because barf. I'll come back to a lot of this. Non-traditional trajectories. I really care about pacing and proportions and the way that, and form. In my office is written music on my whiteboard, music without form is music without form, which is usually not a good thing. There are exceptions, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that form is traditional or expected or symmetrical. Juxtaposition, vertical juxtaposition or horizontal or vertical. I'm really interested in music where different elements are juxtaposed that are not just contrasting, but sometimes like oil and water. They're not supposed to go together. They can't go together, no matter how much you mix it. You wait, 20 seconds and it separates. It just doesn't work, but make it work. stasis versus motion, counterpoint, but not just counterpoint as traditionally defined as notes unfolding in time. There can be a counterpoint of language, a counterpoint of emotion. Per Norgård touches upon this, as does Ligeti. One of the main interests of mine for decades is early music. I was a medieval and Renaissance singer and conductor for 20 years, and this is constantly surfacing in different ways, sometimes overtly, sometimes indirectly in my music. Visual music. I can barely even define this because that's another whole presentation. And then issues. So whether it's a political, social, spiritual, or what have you. Okay, now, I'm going to ask you a question here. What's louder? This, I know it's small, but it is a tutti orchestra hit. In fact, this is the hit. So how many people know what the hit is? I can't see hands or anything, so if you want to answer it, you have to speak up.
Is that from the Firebird?
Exactly. It's the one that was sampled and it's used in, pop and hip hop and rock and whatever, more than any other sample in history. It's everywhere. But it's, if you look closely, it's triple forte. Like it is bam. So what's louder? That or this? Let's actually listen to that, by the way. I mean, you just kind of you have to.
Define louder.
Oh, what? Stop right there. Okay, here we go. I'm gonna just play this. Wrong one here. Okay, right? I mean, that's one of the great moments in Western orchestral repertoire. I mean, it's just like that hit there is so, it's a kick in the face. Okay? So yeah, it's really loud. And he increases it. It happens more and more frequently. So you're just feeling like that's a sledgehammer, But tell me what is the loudest part of this excerpt. Let me see if I can find it. There we go. Okay, ready? Okay, back to that question. Maybe instead of this and this, it's actually this and this, right? A rest with an accent mark. or even that. I mean, there seems to be a total contradiction because by definition, nothing is happening in a rest. So how can a silence be accented with a triple or a fortissimo sforzando? Well, what about that second example with ministry? Yes. Nobody has an opinion.
Okay, I'll go just to eliminate the Zoom silence.
Okay.
I thought the rest was pretty loud or at least powerful. You know, I felt like an accent was there because it was complete silence and everything else was going on.
Absolutely. Right? So it would be even more effective if you would listen to the previous 2 minutes. It's an assault on the senses. Glorious assault. Everything is triple forte. It's industrial speed metal, right? And by this point, it's just like, and it's super fast. So it's super fast, super dense, super loud. And then right towards the end of the song, when there's lots of screaming, it just like locks back into the groove, and it's just like you're driving the car, you hit fifth gear, you're going 120 miles an hour, and all of a sudden, they insert a, whatever it is, third of a second of silence several times. And so that silence, that rest, is actually louder. But I can't see the chat or see anyone's name. I didn't define loud, right? So what is loud? Is it just a volume? Because then, of course, anything that's triple forte is louder than a rest. Or is it, a dynamic, obviously, same thing, really. Is it density, loud? Is it dissonance? Can I have something that's loud, not because of volume or density, but because of dissonance? And the answer is yes. An example, I wish I could pull it up here quickly. A wonderful example is playing a flute tone and an oboe tone at the precise same amplitude. In other words, the exact same decibel level, same volume. Scientifically, it's the same. The oboe, if you ask people which is louder, 100% of people say the oboe's louder. Well, wait a minute. It's not louder. How come they perceive it as louder? But it's because there's dissonance, even in a solo unison, because of the type of waveform. It's more of a triangle wave. And so our ears perceive a triangle wave as louder than a sine wave, even though it's not. So this is what kind of touching on what I was talking about earlier. Dissonance is not just like two notes, a tritone or a major seventh or a cluster or something. We can think about dissonance and consonance with a single tone. Loudness, does that happen to deal with contrast, perhaps? Register. A note played at the exact same dynamic level will not be perceived as the same volume if it's in different register. We don't think about that enough as composers. Or really, as in this case, impact, the context. So the rest in the ministry song has more impact than all the electric guitars through Marshall amps and drum sets and everything else. How can that be? Because of the context and the contrast. So that's how I would argue that the rest, the silence, is louder. One of my favorite t-shirts, I think my students have probably seen me wear this, is this: everything louder than everything else. I don't know name that band. everything louder than everything else, which I love that. And it makes me think, well, everything or anything can be loud. So anything can be louder than anything else. It depends on what you do, what's happening, and how does this affect perception of time? So I'm going to play another example here. Okay, I'm going to be back out here. Okay, back to the same composer. Listen to this. Oh, don't listen to that. I have to share the sound. Okay, name that piece.
Stravinsky,
Symphony of
Symphony of
Songs.
Psalms. Ah, love Symphony of Psalms.
Symphony of Psalms, amazing, one of the most iconic openings of any piece from the past 150 years. And he starts with these forte hits, right? I'll just play it again. Wonderful. I mean, is that not killer? But that's not Stravinsky. That is a lesser composer. That's not Stravinsky. It's not as good as Stravinsky. It's really good, isn't it? But perhaps a couple of you who know this piece well were thinking, something's not right. Roberto, maybe you're like, wait, that is not correct. Something's not right. Now let me play you this. What's different? There's the, oh, okay. No, I don't have the, where is it? Well, in the actual Stravinsky, right there is a rest. And then if you go on, there's other rests. I mean, I don't want to take too much. Let's see. That's the most important one, right here. A lesser composer would go ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-bam. It's so logical. I've done that gesture. I think every composer has done that gesture. Ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-bam. But Stravinsky goes ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-bam. That rest right before the hit, it has so much power, and yet it's subtle, isn't it? It doesn't bonk you. You almost don't. Okay, I'm going to play you, let's see, the beginning of a piece of mine. And first I'm just going to play you the opening, 20, 30 seconds, okay? Okay, I'll play it again. All right. I mean, I don't know. I think that's kind of cool. I mean, I wrote it, of course. So, but I don't know. I think it's pretty grooving. It's just like, you're out of the gate, and it's just like you get a little couple false starts, and then you're just like, it's rock and roll, right? Now I'm going to play you a video. You can see this, right? I'm going to play you a video before I show you the score. What's better? I mean, if we can use such subjective, terms, which has more impact?
The real version.
The real version, I think. The other version, just like, the version of Stravinsky where I took out the rests, is still cool. But it lacks the impact. In the real version, you have this opening gesture that's full of energy. And from the first 4 seconds, the listener understands what that is. It's groove, it's loud, it's dense, it's forward moving. And so in 4 seconds, the listener has all sorts of understanding and expectation. Then there's a pause for 25 seconds. And that silence actually gets louder. I think that silence becomes to the point, there's an accelerando and a crescendo of silence until it's like a quadruple forte of nothing. So then when they re-enter, it's a completely different perspective, understanding. Now people are wondering what the hell is going to happen next. Instead of knowing what's going to happen next, every moment forward from that point, you don't know what's going to happen. That 25 seconds, I think, simultaneously feels shorter and yet longer. Do you know what I mean? So that when you're sitting for 25 seconds, it feels like an eternity. But I've asked people, how long is that silence? And they all say like, oh, that was long. That was like 10, 15 seconds. So they think it's long, but when they calculate intellectually, they're off. It's actually, they state that the time is shorter, but the perception is longer. That's what I'm talking about, the complete duality of a misunderstanding or a contradiction in time. And then once the piece starts, there's juxtaposition, there's the groove element, and then there's these prickly pitches, just kind of like boop, bop, boop, boop, bop. And then there's a sort of a chromatic, slow motion, dissonant implosion pedal point, if you will, that's going on. And then you can also hear just in that excerpt where there's the contradiction or the juxtaposition of consonance and dissonance. The low winds have this wah, 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 and then all of a sudden the upper winds start playing consonant sonorities. And that rub is what I find very interesting and indeed beautiful. I often talk about, Bach and Pergolesi and how what makes the most beautiful music the most beautiful is not all the beauty in it, but it's the dissonance in it, so that the moments of beauty are then amplified 100-fold. If you go and take any Bach chorale and remove the dissonance, you think, oh, it'll be more beautiful, right? No, it's less beautiful. It's boring. Okay, now I'm going to show you the score. Blah, 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 blah. I'll play the video, but I'll just I'll track the score. Okay, before I go on, any comments or questions? In that 1 8-minute piece, it demonstrates almost every single thing that I started with, that whole list of stuff I care about. That's why I played that piece, because you know, a lot of those things that I use, that I care about as a composer, maybe 2 of them are in this piece, maybe 1 of them in this, maybe 3 in this, or you know what I mean? But this one piece almost contains every single thing I care about as a composer in one short piece. It's almost like if I was going to introduce myself as a composer, like, well, listen to that. That's what I do. Melody, I should have included that. I can't remember who it was that said, you know, Gabriella. She sings. Of course, because what? You compose without singing? I don't understand. I am sitting there at the piano or at my computer or manuscript paper with a little keyboard or whatever, and I'm singing all the time. So even in a piece that's got a lot of dissonance, it's got like all this groove and stuff in the middle, there's two moments of just melody, right? And for me, that's an aria. I mean, I am actually singing that as I'm composing. And I think that you could see what I'm talking about, like the dissonant use of consonance and the consonant use of dissonance, and the interplay between the two. I love chocolate mousse, right? It's not my favorite dessert, but like, you know, who doesn't like chocolate mousse? It's like creamy and sweet and delicious to the taste and just yum. But you know, what makes chocolate mousse, or when is chocolate mousse good, and what makes it good? It's like after a meal with other spices and flavors, and then the chocolate mousse in a bowl that's, you know, about this big. Who wants to eat a bowl, like a salad bowl of chocolate mousse? Yuck. That's disgusting. And I think too many composers who are interested in tonality and interested in, you know, writing pretty or beautiful music, they think the solution is, I'm going to give you a bowl of chocolate mousse. And they don't understand that that doesn't have any interest. Nobody wants to finish that bowl. I'm halfway through, I'm like, like it's going down the disposal. So like music that's consonant and it's constant all the time, I just don't find very interesting. On the other hand, we've heard a lot of music in the 20th century that was dissonant all the time. I love a lot of that stuff, right? Some of that is just amazing music. But I don't want to write that. For me, it's the consonance and dissonance where the real power and beauty lies. Any questions in particular about that piece, or?
I have something to say. It's not so much a question, but more of an observation.
Ben? No, who is this?
Yeah, it's Ben.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I think what I liked most about that wind piece that we just heard was it's clear that we see how you're using everything you just mentioned, all these concepts of time and rest and consonance versus dissonance, but you're never doing anything exactly like Stravinsky. You're clearly like just making it your own, and I find that to be a very unique way of composing, and a very like if like a pretty amazing accomplishment, honestly, to take these concepts which have existed for a while and making them your own. So it really contributing something to the field. I really appreciated those pieces from those standpoints.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks. Thanks. Yeah. Chase.
All right, I have a deep question because I love what you're talking about. So my first question in response would be, in the same way that dynamics can be set depending on the context, in a way, you are in defining someone's context with the piece. So if you never get to forte until the end, until then, a mezzo piano could seem more forte. So with consonance and dissonance, could you then, in a way, set someone's perceived
Of course.
dissonance?
Of course. I mean, one of the examples I play, and day one when we talk about consonance and dissonance, is from Bartok Macrocosmos, number. It's called diminished fifths. I can't remember the number, but it's a really cool piece for many different reasons. But specifically thinking about consonance and dissonance, the whole thing is an exploration of tritones, and it goes on for like 2.5 minutes. Doesn't take that much time, and then it ends with a dyad, which is a major sixth, and it sits there, and that feels dissonant. And then the last sonority is a diminished fifth, a tritone. And I play this over and over for students, and they all have the same response. They feel like that penultimate sonority of a major sixth, that's the dissonance, and the major sixth resolves to a tritone. But wait a minute, doesn't a tritone resolve either to a major third, or, well, you can resolve in different ways, but or a perfect fifth, or right? How can you have a major sixth, the consonant interval, feel like that's dissonant and resolve, and then when you get to the tritone, you're like, ah. Well, it's because Bartok has set the context. He's defined exposure effect. Exactly. Yeah. Now, yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on. Geez, I totally realize I'm never going to get to play all the examples that I wanted to, but whatever. I wanted to play you a part of this piece. What We Do Is Secret. And it's a concerto for brass quintet and wind ensemble. It was, I've worked a lot with a fantastic professional brass quintet called Triton Brass, based out of Boston and New York. And they were ensemble in residence at Tanglewood and a whole bunch of big festivals and schools. They performed a brass quintet of mine, and then they said, we love it. Then they commissioned a big brass quintet that was sort of like a mini concerto, where each movement somebody has a solo, and I use several of the movements deal with polytemporality. I might play one movement maybe if I have time. So after that, then they commissioned this concerto for a consortium of wind ensembles. The inspiration behind the piece is my experience in punk rock. But remember I said, I'm interested in cross-fertilization, but not hybrid or crossover, because the barf. I think there are exceptions, but I personally, and this is completely my own feeling, that 90% of what we call hybrid or crossover music falls short. So, a composer is writing something, it's a chamber ensemble piece, and the composer says, this is inspired by speed metal. And and I'm sitting in the audience going, all right, man, let's see what you got, because guess what? I have 25 CDs of speed metal on my shelf at home. So what are you going to do with it? And then the piece plays, and maybe it's a pretty good piece, but it falls short because you cannot, with 5 people, match the energy of, whatever, Slayer or Metallica. I mean, it's not happening. Or composers saying, "Hey, this is inspired by, I'm gonna combine salsa or James Brown or Elvis Presley or whatever in my classical piece," and I sit there thinking, well, the James Brown is 10 times cooler than your piece. The salsa is 10 times cooler than your piece. The Elvis Presley is 10 times cooler than your piece. Do you know what I mean? It's rare where a composer can actually do this crossover to a point where you go like, wow, I hear the influences. Maybe they're overt and obvious. Maybe they're a little more subtle. But this piece stands on its own. I totally get what they're doing, and it's awesome. This is like cool crossover. There are a couple composers that spring to mind. Arrigo Barnabé, Brazilian composer, just brilliant at this. This is not that. This is inspired, it's like an homage to my years in punk rock. That's how I got into classical music. I don't want to spend the next 20 minutes telling my story, but I discovered sort of new music and classical music through my years playing in experimental and punk rock bands. So this concerto draws its title, What We Do Is Secret. It's the title of an album by the Germs. And then each movement, I went and chose a song from late 70s, early 80s LA punk bands. Strange Notes is a song by X. I'm sorry, it's a song by the Germs. The Unheard Music is the title of a song by X. New York's All Right If You Like Saxophones. That's the title of a song by Fear, and Rise Above is the title of a song by Black Flag. That's it. There's no punk rock quotations. There's nothing punk about the piece at all. I chose the pieces not because like, oh, I love that song so much, I'm going to quote it, but because the title was so evocative. Strange Notes. Okay, you don't have to know the punk song by the Germs to know, like, whoa. As a composer, I'm imagining all sorts of things. Like, what are Strange Notes? What does that mean? The Unheard Music. What a beautiful, beautiful, evocative title. And it just like, fires off all sorts of things in my imagination. So they were points of departure. But you know what? I am going to play you the opening to Strange Notes. Not because I quote it, but just to give you like some context. No, that's not a good version. Maybe I have it in my iTunes. Do I have it? No, I do not. I mean, everything's on Spotify except for what I want to play. It's like, what's that? Okay, here we go. Okay, that's it. Goes on from there. I mean, this is the music of my youth, along with Miles Davis and Joni Mitchell, mind you, but whatever. It's for wind ensemble and brass quintet. And the other thing about the piece is that it's an homage to my early years in late 70s, early 80s punk rock, but also early music. So I spent 20 years as a singer and conductor of medieval and early music. And this first movement has a lot of similarities to the playlist piece that you just heard, dealing with, fortissimo, both punches and fortissimo rests, if you will. The perception of time, and that there's two different rates of time happening. But the main idea, I treat the brass quintet not as 5 different players in this first movement, but as one, sort of a meta brass instrument. And what they're playing is more or less a melody that starts here and just goes all the way through the piece. It's very linear, and it's just a single line. I mean, things start fragmented and getting ornamented, but I really perceive it conceptually as one melody, inspired by one of my favorite Renaissance composers, Ockeghem. So, not to recap, music history, but what sets Ockeghem apart from other composers such as DuFay or Josquin or Tallis or Palestrina is that he wrote these long melodies, pieces of music that go on for pages in modern edition with no place to rest. Was he an idiot? He didn't know that singers had to rest? No, of course not. He was a singer and a conductor himself, and so they just allied. But he wrote these melodies where, instead of unfolding in traditional phrase forms as we kind of experience from Bach through Mozart to Beethoven to even the majority of 20th century music, they're elongated with phrase elisions. So every time there's a cadence and you think it's going to rest, it does not. It connects right into the next phrase of music. So these melodies just unfold almost out of time, like this, just kind of expansive. It's hard, it's going to be hard to see much because if I go to the full score, it looks like this. So what's that? It's little black dots. So I'm going to try to kind of scroll up and down, and so you can kind of track maybe what's most important. I don't know.
You're not sharing your screen.
Oh, yeah, that would help. Yeah, I was going to say, if I give it full score, that's what it looks like. You can't see anything, right? So I'm going to I'm just going to do my best and focus on maybe what's the most important. Okay, now, what happened to my Spotify? It disappeared, which means okay. Okay, this is the first movement. There's this chorale of clarinets and saxes that goes throughout much of the piece. But like pianissimo. going to jump to the third movement. Let me pause. I'm jumping to the third movement because this is sort of the combination of another big influence of mine, which is jazz. We've heard a lot of composers in their presentations talk about how they're influenced by jazz harmonies in particular. This piece is more influenced by my experience as a crappy saxophonist in jazz bands in junior high and high school, playing, bebop, or more accurately, wishing that I could play bebop and couldn't. The movement's called New York's All Right If You Like Saxophones, and it's really a duet between the brass quintet and a sax quartet. And you'll hear that they're trading fours, just like you would find in a Charlie Parker tune. I can't follow the chat. I see there's like 39 message or chats I haven't read. So someone can bring me up to speed if there's a question, a comment. So, I would point out there that obviously groove, rhythm, big part of my music, but not always. And the influence of jazz is not jazz harmony. I rarely use, what I would term jazz harmony, but more like other elements from the jazz idiom, gestural, So, in fact, in terms of harmony, both in the first movement and in the third movement, I use sets. So, believe it or not, almost all the harmony in both those two movements are like 025s, 027s, a bunch of perfect fifths and perfect fourths. You heard it a lot in the, in the solo part in the brass quintet. So that there's lots of chromatic noodling here and there, but the overarching feeling is like almost fanfare-ish, very melodic, a bunch of consonants. In this movement, there's the sax quartet and the brass quintet are doing like all this hyperspeed, like blah, 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 right? But if you analyze every 16th note, verticality, it's like almost all 025 or 027. But it's moving so fast linearly that you never grab onto it. So it doesn't sound like, oh, geez, that's another freaking piece of 025. What are we, in Eric Whitacre land? I mean, no, it's flying by, and it's that, when you have every individual moment, if you slowed it down hyper, mega, it would be all this consonance, but compressed in time, it's not. And so what is it then? Is it consonance or dissonance? I don't know, but it's grooving. Okay. Let me see. I need to gather my thoughts for a second. Okay. Well, this is kind of a change of gear, and I'm not actually going to play it to you, but I want to show it to you because it touches on something that I mentioned earlier, and that pianist in his awesome presentation. Can you help me out? The pianist.
Wilfried.
Yeah. Because he talked a lot about notation and what that means to composers, and when you renotate something or blah, blah, blah. And we then had a follow-up convo back and forth. And a couple years ago, when I was at Copeland House, I was commissioned to write a solo piano piece by this pianist, Scott Holden, for his, he was doing a big solo recital at Carnegie Hall. I was writing all this piano music. I mean, you know what that is. Piano music. And I had pages of sketches, and I always draw pictures and forms, and I had all this stuff, and I hated it. I was stuck. It sucked, and it all went into the garbage. And one of the lessons that, it's one of the toughest lessons as a composer to learn is when to take everything that you've worked hard on and crumple it up and throw it into the trash, because it's very painful. We become very connected and invested in what we do, right? And too often we continue down dead-end alleys because I put 3 weeks or 3 months into this piece. There's some good stuff here. I can make it work, right? Well, I sometimes no. The answer is no. Maybe not now. Maybe not in this piece. So I threw it all away, and then I was super stressed. Super stressed. And it came to me. Over the course of 2 nights in the state of near sleep with hypnagogia, I just heard the piece. I get kind of, this whole composers hearing pieces in their sleep. I think it's mostly BS. but not entirely. I have several pieces that came to me in my sleep. And at one point, I knew that if I didn't wake up and write it down or record it, I was going to forget it. So I forced myself to get out of bed, go to my computer, turn it on, and sing what I was hearing into the computer, turn it off, and go back to sleep. And it was a whole piece. Anyway, in this piece, I heard, it just came to me. I could hear the piece. The problem was that I was hearing a dance suite with multiple movements. I couldn't tell exactly, ended up being 5 movements, but it was a multiple movement dance suite for piano, and all the movements were being played at the same time. So if you pull up, 5 pop songs and play them all at the same time, it's basically garbage. It's cacophony, right? But in the state of hypnagogia, we can actually experience things that are otherwise impossible. So I decided to try to write a piece that had this happening. And the piece ended up being Suite Hypnagogique or Hypnagogique. And what it is 5 movements. There's a prelude, a chorale, a toccata, a chanson, and then a fugue. It can take 7 to 10 minutes. Actually, I've heard a performance that took 15 minutes because you're playing all the movements at the same time. So there's a toccata, a small fragmented toccata, a chorale without end, a small grand fugue, a prelude, a chanson, and they're all happening at the same time. So the way the pianist does it is follow this. And the pianist has to perform from I can't. Well, you get the point. There, with the whole score, these 2 pages stretched out on the piano, and there's a direction of which pieces to start. There's an ordering of when they introduce the pieces, but once you start playing the chorale or the prelude or the fugue, then it's played continuously while you're playing all the other movements. There is no way to renotate this. Remember how he was saying, like, well, in some cases there's a sort of conceptual idea that influences or determines the composer's notation, and then I have to decide whether to follow that or actually renotate it in such a way that it's practical. So in this way, there is no practical solution. You just have to do it. And the idea is not that there's 5 different movements that are interrupting each other. They're actually supposed to be perceived as flowing uninterrupted, but at the same time. And unfortunately, I don't have a recording that's even worth playing because they wouldn't record it. And then we had at Carnegie Hall, and then he's performed it several times since. None of those recitals were recorded, and then we were going to record it for a CD, and the recording, and then pandemic. So, and then I was contacted by another pianist who said she wants to record it for CD and do sort of what she's proposing is a video performance where she performs it in different ways, like 3 or 4 times. And then somehow we haven't figured out how this is going to work, but so that it's like interactive and it's not a performance, a recording that's one concrete thing where every time you listen to it, it's the same, because that just sort of runs contrary to the idea of the piece. But if you have multiple videos of her, then the listener can actually interact online and kind of play around like in a game and have different things entering in and what have you. Okay, I probably have time for like one, I don't know, one more piece or something. Should I play something? I'm just talking to myself because I had like 4 different options here. Well, okay. I'm going to play you one movement of my oratorio. So I need to pull up that file. I'm sorry. Of course, I have 7 files open and not that one. Okay. The last thing I'll play for you is from my oratorio, Zealot Canticles. And this is one of many pieces in recent years that deal with different types of social issues. It's an oratorio for tolerance. The text is by Wole Soyinka, who, of course, you're all familiar with. Not, I'm sure very few people know, but he was a Nobel Prize winning author, poet, novelist, playwright, who was also an activist and humanitarian who spent several years in prison for speaking out against genocide and human rights in Nigeria. So imagine a Nelson Mandela figure if Nelson Mandela was also a Nobel Prize winning poet and writer. Okay, that's Wole Soyinka. It was commissioned by the Crossing, which is really the best, the elite choir in the U.S. right now, for choir, soprano, mezzo, baritone, clarinet, and string quartet. This is a whole presentation. I could spend an hour discussing this piece, and I'm not going to. I'm just going to play one, maybe 2 movements, max. Yeah, I think maybe just one. I'm going to play The Writing on the Wall, page 41. The whole piece is about zealotry, tolerance, lack thereof, but in a very nuanced, not black and white manner, which I think would be not interesting at all. This particular movement, The Writing on the Wall, well, first, I'll read you the text. The writing on the wall is no longer a mere biblical metaphor. It refers graphically today to the spattered graffiti of blood on the walls of our homesteads, schools, offices, sanctuaries of worship, and children's nurseries. I mean, I can't read this without getting choked up. Sorry. That writing is the universal language of nations on the road to perdition. Permit me to recall an exercise in a minor key. Did we fail to learn that guns and boots are not necessary for a coup d'etat? In other words, we as cultures and nations, we commit coup d'etats against ourselves through racism, bigotry, intolerance, politics, etc. It's not just, it doesn't take some military overthrow. Countries all around the world do it to themselves. Look at Afghanistan. Yes, there's military involved, but it's really an ideology that's going to freaking blow up that country again. What's interesting, or one of the things about this, is that the piece unfolds in multiple rates of time. So the soprano and clarinet are working together. The string quartet is in a different time signature and a different tempo. So you'll see that none of the bar lines line up. And then different members of the string quartet join the soprano and clarinet and vice versa. It takes a lot of working out of how to notate it, the choreography, etc. And I'm just, rather than talk more, I'm just going to play it. And then probably we'll have questions, and that'll be all we'll have time for. How are we doing on time? We go to 1:45, right? We have 10 minutes, so then we should open for comments, questions. I could maybe play one more movement. I don't know, but I want to make sure that we have time for. No, nothing.
I had a question which I put in the chat, but whatever, I'll just say it. Do those singers have perfect pitch, or are they just that?
No, they, well, I know one of them doesn't because I'm writing her another piece right now. My current project is a big piece for the 100th anniversary of James Joyce's Ulysses. So the mezzo soprano is for mezzo soprano and chamber orchestra, Sinfonietta, and she does not have perfect pitch, but if you help them out, it's very melodic. It's actually very consonant, singable, and the clarinet, the soprano, the whole first section is shadowing. It's neo-heterophony there. So the clarinet, it's constantly giving support to the soprano without just like, doubling entirely. But, that's something I think about a lot. I do a lot of choral music and vocal music. I finished an opera last year, and I have art songs and lots of choral music. And I don't have perfect pitch. So if I write something that I can't figure out and I can't sing, I try to make things, singers are not clarinetists where they just push down a key, or a guitarist with frets. So it's something that I'm very careful, considerate about, is writing vocal lines, whether it's choral or solo, that make sense. Should I play one more movement? It's like 2 minutes, or what? I see one nod, because I want to make sure we have, yeah. Okay, I'll just, where is it? Okay, I'm going to play, I might as well play a choral one. And this sort of demonstrates what I'm talking about. Of course, it would help if I just went to the right page number. Here. This is just for SATB and clarinet. Here. Oh, sorry, I didn't share. Okay. again, it demonstrates a lot of the things that I was talking about. You hear consonants and that's a great example of the dissonant use of consonants. So there's several sections where there's cadences of a big consonant sonority, and I start another consonant sonority beforehand, and they bleed through, and then one stops, and then you hear the other consonant sonority. But when you have the consonants A and consonants B overlapping, it's this hyper dissonant crunch, and then the one moves away, and you're left with this beautiful sonority. That's much more beautiful than if I just gone from consonants to consonants, I think. Okay. I mean, we have like 2 minutes. Any? That's it? Okay. Well, thank you all. Still processing. Okay. I don't know if
Thank you as well.
yeah, perfect pitch. I'm just kind of going, yes, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I mean, in fairness, this choir, even though they don't have perfect pitch, they're, they can sing anything. I mean, anything. So I was able to push the limits, in some cases, to write choral music that I knew 19 out of 20 other choirs can't do. Which, of course, what does that mean? It means I lose 19 other performances because I've written something that only someone who's at this level can do. But, you know, you have to write what you have to write. Good to see you, Roberto.
It's really beautiful music that you played for us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so
much. This vocal oratorio is poetic. Bravissimo.
Thank you.
And really, I think that it explains all the apparent dichotomy, dissonance, consonance, silence, fortissimo, that is in 1,000 nuances in all parameters, all aspects. And it's really, it makes, tonight I understood your poetics.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for that. Yes, that means a lot coming from someone like you. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all once again. I guess it's on to the what was the bountiful Beontiful concert. And I look forward to seeing everything. It's been great meeting you all, and I'll see you later tonight and as we wrap things up tomorrow.